Hello, everyone. Sound check. Miss Benny, are you able to hear me?
I am able to hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Can we start?
Can you hear me?
Signal. All right. A very good afternoon, everyone. Today, we are going to have a virtual talk, and the topic will be rethinking folklore concepts and context. And this virtual talk is organized by the Department of English, Higher and Technical Institute, Mizoram. And today, I am very happy and honored to have announced that Ms. Dr. Yanbeni Yanthan from Nagaland University is able to join us and give us her lecture on this topic. And I'm very thankful today. And Ms. Benny, before I actually call you to give a lecture, let me briefly trace the details of this program. First, shortly after this, I will call upon our Vice Principal, Mr. Arlal Nunthara, to have a short welcome speech. And after that, I will stand up here again, and I will have a brief introduction about the educational and work experiences of our resource person. And after that, I will call up our resource person again, and then the lecture will commence. So now, without much further delay, I will call upon our vice principal to have a short welcoming speech, or let's say opening speech.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ma'am, and good afternoon, the participants. Today, the English department is organizing the virtual talk, topic Rethinking Folklore, Concept and Context. So this time, on behalf of the college, I welcome Dr. Yanbeni Yanthan, Assistant Professor, Center for Naga Tribal Language Studies, Nagaland University. And thank you, Miss, for making yourself available as the speaker in this webinar. And I also welcome all the participants who attend the webinar. And nowadays, advancements in technology have made communications easier and more convenient than ever before. Virtual talks through video call and other digital platform has become an integral part of our daily life, connecting people across the globe in real time. And this time also, due to the advancements of technology, now we'll be able to listen an expert talk from Nagaland. So we are really, really fortunate to have Ms. Yanbeni Yanthan as a speaker in this webinar. And I hope that all the participants will get benefit from this webinar, and I hope this webinar will be fruitful for all the participants. And I welcome you all once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarmanuna, our vice principal, for having the time and willing to come here to give a welcome speech. And now we are coming closer to the actual lecture. And before I actually invite Dr. Yanbeni, let me briefly trace some details of her educational and work experiences. And like I mentioned, she is an assistant professor at the Center for Naga Tribal Language Studies in Nagaland University. And her area of study includes oral tradition of the Nagas, folklore, vernacular literature, the study of language and culture, and critical theory. Her poetry essays, and reviews have been featured in various national and international spaces such as RAIOT, the Bombay Literary Magazine, Muse India, Outlook, Telangana Today, East Mojo, Sapiens, the Bangalore Literary Review, among others. She has also contributed her writings in various anthologies and collections, and Dr. Yanthan has also served as an assistant professor in the Department of English at Saw College. So those are some of her experiences, and before I call her, I would like to urge both our online and offline audience to listen to the lecture attentively. And the whole purpose of this organizing this kind of talk, whether it is virtual or offline, is to increase and widen and enrich our intellectuals. So please listen to her attentively and try to have as much questions or comments as possible. Now I would like to hand over the time to Dr. Yanbeni, and now the time is handed over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sammy. Um, Good afternoon, everyone. Respected Vice Principal, um, Sammy, then staff, faculty, and dear students of HATIM. I thank the Department of English, first and foremost, for extending this hand of invitation to deliver a talk on a topic that I have been working with for a few years now. Um, for me, it is the first time that I am interacting with an institution from Mizoram. So for me, it is an absolute honor and delight to share this space, even though it is a virtual space. I am absolutely honored, and I look forward not only to deliver the lecture, but most importantly, in interacting with the students and the Mizo folklore and the Mizo language and aspects of the Mizo cultural experience, because most of my work has been limited mostly only to Nagaland. So when I am going to deliver my lecture, I hope that you will be able to contextualize whatever I am saying in the context of your own social reality and that of Mizoram. So without much further ado, I will just share my PPT. Okay. So my talk is basically on redefining folklore. When you talk about folklore, what do you usually think of? Taylor Swift, I think she came up with an album called Folklore, right? I think it was last year or something. And the name became so popular, everyone started talking about folklore, 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 right? And even in the context of the northeast of India, when we talk about folklore, what do we usually think of? What is the first thing that comes to your mind? I'm sure what comes to your mind is something like this, right? I mean, especially for younger generation, we usually think of folklore in terms of something that is related to the past, something that is related to, our cultural heritage, right? Something that, like, stories or narratives that don't have, that is slightly exaggerated or uses elements of fantasy. So therefore, they do not, by that token, have a sense of rationality, right? So that is what, even in Nagaland, when you talk about folklore, we are always meaning it to be the culture of our forefathers, which implies that it is talking about pre-modern pre-modern or pre-Christian cultures. We don't associate it usually with what is happening in our lives in the present. Or let's say if I wear something traditional, I would say, oh, this is part of our folk culture or something like that, right? So is that right or is that wrong? Let's go ahead. Let's go and see in term as especially in the light of the discipline of folkloristics, whether it is whether it can be called folklore or not, right? And I'm saying this now because it's not like it is wrong, but folklore, when we limit it to the past, when we associate folklore only to the past, we are very, very drastically limiting the idea and notion of folklore, right? So, what is folklore then, right? So, there are certain characteristics that make folklore a folklore. By the term itself, folk and lore. The folk means people or groups of people. Lore is the knowledge or your knowledge system, your data, right? So certain qualities are there in folklore that make folklore. So what are they? As mentioned in the slide, one thing is that the first thing is that it is traditional. Anything can be traditional, students. It's not only oral cultures that can be tradition, that has tradition. In English, in modernist writing, or in the written tradition, it's also, when you look at the work of Virginia Woolf and all those, they also come from a particular tradition of writing. So tradition implies anything, both oral and non-oral, right? Both oral and written cultures. When anything is passed on from generation to generation, it is called traditional. So that is the idea, that something that is passed down. And the second characteristic is that it is characterized by the availability of versions and variations. So in Naga, we I'm sure as is the same with the cookie chin mizo group as well. We share a lot of common stories, like how we came to the earth, like creation myths. How did the human beings come to the earth, or how did my tribe come to this place called Nagaland, right? So we share a lot of similar features. Okay, similar stories, similar rituals, or similar beliefs. So what happens is that in when we talk about folklore, the availability of versions and variations validates the fact that a particular item is a folklore. Of course, certain things like proverbs, so to speak, proverbs may not have versions and variations, right? Because most of the time, from my study in Nagaland, the proverbs may not have versions and variations, but nevertheless, they are also a form of folklore, because the way the proverb is told is also very different from clan to clan or from village to village, right? And they are marked by orality, which means that in folklore, unlike, so what differentiates folklore from the others is that it is marked by orality, means it is orally handed down. So when I say orality, means not only by word of mouth, even like for simple things like basket making or weaving, right? These, the weaving of patterns or the basket making, all of these things are also oral, because you do not use the written word in order to teach somebody. So in oral cultures, what happens is that you teach someone by you watch that person work, and then you learn, right? So it is, in English it is called apprenticeship, right? Even hunting, for that matter, like in Naga culture, we used to have these institutions, or I would just say in every village there is this kind of like a house where boys from certain age groups are kept there. It's a kind of like a pedagogical tool. Basically, it's where every village, they will sit and they will learn from there, right? The art of war, or the how to make basket, or how to make that spear and all that. And there, in that dormitory, it's a kind of dormitory, right? The boys, they will learn the art, and in some tribes even the girls have the dormitory. So I'm sure, I think maybe you also had a dormitory, I'm not sure about that, but the Naga tribes, we used to have that. Okay, so there we used to learn, especially boys used to learn how to hunt. So hunting, as you know, it's not something that you can simply learn like that, right? So you just go to the jungle and then forest, and you just simply can't just make start hunting. There is a different art of hunting also, right? So hunting, etc. It's all these things are learned by what we call discipleship, where and then you have like basketry and all, blacksmith, like when you're making this traditional guns. These are all done by apprenticeship, so these are also oral. Now we come to one important aspect of folklore is that it is anonymous. Now, what do I mean by it is anonymous? Means when because the lore, the knowledge belongs doesn't belong to one person, it belongs to the people who are the folk. And this is a point where a lot of people get confused because sometimes they say, oh, this folk song belongs to that person, especially when in relation to folk songs. And anonymity is something that has always been problematic because when you think of songs, obviously, like, the way a song is structured, it means that there has to be at least one or two composers, or not many, right? So when you look at things like when you look at this aspect of folklore, you just know this that when what do I mean by when folklore needs to be anonymous means, of course, at certain point of time that folklore may have been composed by one person, but over the years, as it is being traditional passed down from generation to generation, the authors, the name of the quality of the authorship of the song becomes secondary, and people know the tune, people pass down the tune, the song, much more than the importance is given to the author or to the composer. Okay, so is that clear so far? Can I move on? So these are some definitions of what is folklore, and I will just quickly just go over it because I don't want to waste too much time. Folklore is basically any group of people who ever share at least one common factor. So it could be, so what is a folk group? So you might ask if this is folklore, so how do we define what is a folk group? So any group of people, like 10 people, you put them together and there is one linking factor. There's something that links each one of us, right? Right now, it is the lecture, and that here we are in the purposes of education. So we are also a folk group in that sense. Okay. Then the second definition says that it is artistic communication in small groups. Basically, especially here, when you say artistic communication in small groups, we are saying that, folklore is something that we are saying that folklore is something that uses verbal art to communicate, right? So verbal art is mostly refers to proverbs, mostly refers to tales, or songs, which require this kind of artistic communication. And the third definition is talking about how it is handed on by either by word of mouth or by custom practice. It is songs, tales, riddles, proverbs, and other such things. Okay. Now, here I want to just before I go into the fields of folklore and folklife, by this is classification by Richard M. Dawson, I want to tell you all, as tribal minority students of tribal students and minority students, often we feel trapped and we want so much to assimilate ourselves into Western classification systems. This classification is just one of the many classification systems that are there. So especially in language studies, what I have observed is that when you talk about language classification, we are always trying so hard to put ourselves, or any kind of classification, poetry classification, like that, we always try very hard to put ourselves in Western, in thinking in Western light, or Western frameworks. And I think as indigenous or minority or tribal students and scholars, that is one error. Of course, we must acknowledge that the Western cultures have a set way of classification, but how we classify our data really depends on us. We don't need. So, I'll give you an example. Um, in Nagaland right now, what is happening is we are in the process of making this new curriculum for the school level, and in there we are also we have this literature papers, and the name of the book is Heritage Studies. It is about learning the heritage of the Nagas. But in the literature portion, they are saying, oh, collect lyrical poetry, collect elegy, collect collect this and that. But the idea of poetry itself is a Western concept, right? Because when you look at our Naga folklore, actually we don't have in the and I'm talking about traditional folklore. right? That has been passed on from generation to generation. We don't have that kind of Western notion of poetry. We have songs that are sung, right? Verses that are sung. So the notion of poetry is itself a Western construct. But what we are doing, and it's a wrong thing that we are doing, hopefully it will be, we will revamp it again. We are thinking in terms of Western classification. So we are classifying our folk songs or folk poems as elegy, as, and as lyrical poems like that, which is actually an right, because we our own indigenous or our own tribal data, we have our own indigenous or own tribal or own ethnic classification. I'm sure it is there for you also. It's for all the tribes, especially for those cultures that don't have script. This is very important, right? I would urge you all as prospective scholars and students of literature to always try to see that is there internally by not trying so hard to fit into the Western frameworks. Okay, and that is how you as a scholar, as a native scholar, will blossom, and that will be the uniqueness of your work. And not only that, that will also be one of the ways in which you can truly understand your folklore from the context of your own tribe, not from the context of Western classifications, right? So this is just one of the classification systems given by Richard M. Dawson, of the European and American type of folklore. You can see how you can fit into this, or if it doesn't fit, also don't worry about it. Okay, don't ever worry about not having that your folklore is not fitting into this kind of classification, right? So oral folklore is all of those folklore that uses verbal expression, word of mouth, and this art of verses. So you have folk narrative, under which we have folk tales, right? Different types of tales. You have simple tales, you have complex tales and other such. Then you have narrative folk poetry. Now this is something that we Nagas have a lot, and I'm sure it's there even in your tradition. Narrative folk poetry is basically poetry that is sung, that is poetry that is given a tune traditionally, right? Then you have the folk epic. An epic is a kind of long poem that uses a specific, it may use some kind of formula. For example, like in the Karbi people, or Karbi people, they have this long death epic, which is sung when somebody from the community dies, and it is believed that that's death epic is this folk epic, which is death epic. It's sung for about 17 to 18 hours. Imagine. Okay, so obviously what happens with orality is that with oral cultures is that because we have to rely so much on memory, and especially now that we are shifting to the world of writing, okay, all these traditional genres, or all these traditional verses are getting lost. And in Naga context, we have lost almost all of the epics that used to be there, right? So unfortunately, we do not have documentation those days like that, so it has lost. Now we have proverbs and proverbial expression. So in the context of tribal societies in the Northeast, we might not have that exact type of proverb, but we will have proverbial sayings, like something, because proverb actually it has a kind of structure, right? It has a balance, a structure. Like for example, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. So there are two parts of the proverb which gives balance, but so an apple a day keeps the doctor away are two. But in traditional and minority tribals of the Northeast, we usually don't have full-fledged proverbs, but we have proverbial sayings. Okay. Then we have riddles, a kind of question, and we have folk speech, is a kind of like, when you have a particular slang, particular way of speaking within a particular village, or particular maybe a village or a clan, that's folk speech. Then you have social folk custom, talks about festivals and creation celebrations, about that. Even games and medicine and religion, right? Then you have material culture, crafts, arts, architecture, costume, cookery, even the way you cook food itself. Because as I've mentioned in the previous slide, there are some characteristics, and they all of these fields of folklore fall under those 5 points, right? Then you have folk arts, which has drama, music, and dance. So I know Mizoram is has a lot of beautiful folk music and folk dance. So that also comes under folk arts. Obviously, you can have a unique classification only for Mizo folklore and folk life, encapsulating both narratives and practices and aspects of life like cooking and architecture. Even architecture, buildings like that. So how we make our houses, how the traditional homes are made, on all of these. Okay, let me just talk a little bit, 3 4 minutes on historical folkloristics. Basically, this is the how the discipline came about. So earlier it was called popular antiquities, but then after that it became known as folklore. The hyphen was given there. So it was in the year, I think, 1872, that this name was given, folk and lore. It's hyphenated, which means it is a compound term. Okay, it's a compound term called folk and lore. And even though today we use folklore as one word, it is still understood as a compound term like folk and lores, right? So, in Germany, what happened was, I don't know if you have all watched this movie called The Brothers Grimm. If you have not watched, you should try to watch it. In Germany, you had this two brothers called Jacob and William Grimms. They went to the German countryside, to the villages of Germany, to collect their folk tales, the folk narratives that were there, all the oral narratives that were there, because they wanted to show, they wanted to impress upon how unique the Germanic religions of the Dark Ages were. So they went and then they collected all of these folklore from the village, and that gave birth to, later on, these feelings of nationalism and all that. And later on, to in the 20th century, we all know how that happened, right? Although extreme kind of nationalism happened, and then they started, they started talking about how the Aryan race started becoming the most superior race, and then the World War II happened, right? So in Germany, that happened. Okay, and in Britain, you had Edward Taylor and Andrew Lang. Okay, they published. Sorry, they wanted to understand the practices of prehistoric man, and James Fraser's The Golden Bow. If you are doing English, then you will know The Golden Bow, 1890. This is one of the most important books that emerged out of this tradition, right? And then you have, later on, you have this motif index of folk literature by Auntie Arne and Steve Thompson that also emerged. This is also basically like all the tales of the world, right? They collected so many tales of the world, and then they classified them according to their motifs. So if you go today on Google and you type motif index of folk literature, all of their different types of animal tales, different types of different tales are there, which you can see, and then you can use that index to see what your folklore, where your folklore is, where your folk tale is falling under which band, under which number, like that. Okay, so all of these things was happening, and what was happening was, more importantly, it was the search of the ur form. The ur form refers to the original form of the folktale, right? So people wanted to see, oh, there are so many folk tales, like the Grimm brothers were collecting so many folk tales, and they started saying, oh, what is the original form of the folk tale, and can it ever be found? So out of this emerged this historical geographical method, which is also known as the Finnish Finnish school. It's not. It's more. It's both a school of thought, and it's both a methodology also, to find the ur form, or the original form of a particular folktale, right? So if you think about it, like, especially within particular language groups, right? So we have the Tibeto-Burman language groups. For like us, all of us come under like the Tibeto. I think we all come under the Tibeto-Burman language group. And if you look at this, you tell me, okay? Perhaps you. I wish it was not a virtual meeting. Perhaps you might be able to tell me what your opinion is. Whether we all come from the single original language and over the years have come, and then or is it that maybe that all of us, all our cultures emerge at the same time, but we did not contact with each other, like that, right? So I'll tell you a little bit about monogenesis and polygenesis. These are very important terms, like for in understanding cultural evolution. Monogenesis refers to single point of diffusion, which means that they believe that all the cultures in the world originated from one place. That's what they're saying, right? So whether all of us, you, me, the people in Tripura and Meghalaya is a bit different. I think they're the Australo-Asiatic. But if you think about it, whether all of us, did we come from one original person, or maybe culture, or is it that we are polygenetic, which means that we like coming from different groups, but it's just that we are alike. So this is what the theory said, right? They are saying that there are three types of schools, or three schools of thought are there. First is the Indianists. The Indianists believe that all the cultures of the world emerged and began in India. Now, why do they say that? Is because even things like the stories of Panchatantra, which the Panchatantra story is basically, it's a group of animal tales, ancient animal tales. Now, these people, the Indians, felt that the stories now that were there in the Panchatantra, and all the stories that were there popular in the Middle East and Europe, like Sinbad the Sailor, and different stories, they all have the same structure and the same motif and the same theme as the Panchatantra tales. So out of this, they said that India could be one of the single point of diffusion. The second is the Egyptianists, where people said, oh, the Egyptianists, maybe the people from Egypt are, because, if you look at especially cultural practices, right? The rituals, or the things, rituals, or, all of them originated in Egypt. Then you have the historical geographical method, which aimed to look at the ur form, or original form. So what they did was they would collect lots and lots of folk tales, and by studying the motif of every single folk tale, they would try to bring down and try to go back to the ur form. However, if you think about it, because of orality, will it even be possible? Will it even be possible to find the original form of anything? That's what people were asking, right? So this historical geographical method is basically you're using a set of tales to find the history of a particular tale over by looking at the geography of a particular tale, like where the versions and variations of the particular story is there, and over a particular geographical area. So it is not like they will just go and collect random tales, but like, let's say, northeast of India, they will collect different types of origin stories, and they will try, by looking at motifs and themes, recurrent themes, like they will try to find out the origin of the original story. So a lot of people said, oh, it's not possible, like that. So these other people said, this is like, there actually cultures can be very much like grow parallel to each other, and they can converge, they can meet each other at some certain point of time, like that, right? So the polygenesis people said that no, there is not only one single form, one single point origin of cultures, but there are many different points of origin of culture. That's what they said. So they are saying that just because we have similarity in origin myth, we have similarities in rituals, we have similarities in belief, doesn't mean that we are connected just because of similarities. So they said that because similar needs and development can create similar cultural artifacts. That's what they're saying. Even if you have never met each other, because the needs of the group, the particular needs of a culture is similar. Okay, so culture A, culture B may be similar. So the development, so what happens is that you will end up creating similar artifacts. So they're saying that no, this is also cannot be discounted. So they try to discount the monogenesis theory, right? So this is person, he spoke about this notion of the oikotype. The oikotype is basically the localized version. So I told you now the versions and variations are available. So out of that, every single version and variation is basically the localized form of a particular folk tale. So when a folk tale moves from one community to another, like that, it absorbs and it new Like maybe sometimes the name will be different, or maybe sometimes one part of the story will be different, everything else will be same, right? So these are what he calls regional oikotypes. Okay, so when you think about it, right, when you think about it, obviously it's something that that is one defining characteristic of our tribal folk culture, is that is orality, right? um, Orality, all of our folk culture has been birthed in an oral culture, in an oral culture where there was no writing. The shift to writing happened only in the last how many years for us? Hardly 100 years, right? Hardly 100, and our written tradition is hardly 150 years. I don't know about Mizo, but I'm pretty sure it's not less than, it's not more than 150 to 200, right? Because around the same time, I think all of us were converted to Christianity, and all of us became, all of us became converted to Christianity, and all of us started going to Western schools and all that, right? So, it's very different when you live in an oral world and when you live in literal world. Today, we cannot, you and I, we cannot even imagine being in a world where there is no writing, right? Or where there is no, forget about writing, like you can't think of a universe where you don't have things to help you, right, in your remembrance. So writing is a technology, right? It helps you to remember. It helps you, it organizes your thoughts, right? So, as a species, as human beings, we have been on this earth for about 50,000 years as Homo sapiens. But the oldest script can be dated back only to 6,000 years ago. And right now, for us, people like us, we still don't have a script, right? Of course, have the Roman script which we are using, right? In the absence of native script. So what happens is that this shift from orality to literacy is something that is completely restructures the way we think. I'll tell you how. I'll tell you how. Supposing just now I ask each one of you to think of a word called nevertheless. Okay, you think of the word right now, of the word nevertheless. You are you thinking of it? I hope you are. So when you think of the word nevertheless, what are you thinking of? You are thinking of the alphabets NEVERTHELESS, right? You are not thinking of situation. You're not thinking in terms of an abstract feeling or an abstract notion of nevertheless. This is what I mean when I say that writing reconstructs or restructures your consciousness, because you cannot think, right, in out of the the out of this hegemony of the written word, because you are so trained in thinking in terms of the literal, right? So when you write, you are putting, when you write something, you are putting whatever you see, whatever you think in words. So you can see the words. I can see the words on the PPT, and so can you, right? So what's happening right now is that you cannot, you are thinking, you are reading, and then you're conceptualizing the words that you're reading on the screen in your head. Right. So what happens is that in orality, these are what we call residues in written cultures. So the alphabets that you see on the screen are residues of your thought. That means something is there that is being thrown and written on, thrown on the PPT and then written for you and me. But when it comes to orality, there is no such residue. Once I speak it, it's gone. So, for example, I'm giving you a speech, right? I'm giving you a lecture right now, and I'm using orality, right? I'm giving you an oral speech. But once I utter something and I close my mouth, it's gone. But with literal words, it is there on the page for a long time, and you can just go back and you can change the color. You can see it. It's almost like you can touch it, right? So, if you look at oral languages that are only purely oral, like yours and mine, okay, our languages at one point of time, obviously, until very recently, our languages were only simply oral. So you will notice that you don't have that many words, right? Because like making the Anglo Naga dictionaries right now, and we noticed that for so many words we have to repeat. Like in my language, Lotha, uh, Nzan, Nzan means love, like, adoration, so many different. My notion, it is my hypothesis that perhaps when a language evolves, no, when a language evolves, what happens is that these art forms, these verbal art forms also become much more structured. So you have, like in French and other languages that are so-called evolved, okay, much more evolved, which means basically have a writing script. They have much more structured stories. They have much more structured proverbs and proverbial sayings. But this doesn't mean that ours don't have also. It's just that they are smaller. They are more fragmented. Okay. So, for example, when you're looking at speaking at the oral world, like speech is something that is you cannot separate from your consciousness. So, for example, again, when you're reading the script, when you're reading this power dynamics of orality and say, but even if you're reading it quietly, creating the sound that psychodynamics, you cannot escape the the orality in that is interiorized in your mind. Psychodynamics is like, psychodynamics, like you are saying it in your mind, even if you are writing it. So if you're even if you're writing it, for example, when you're writing your exam, when you're writing, you're being historically associated with the court, which means the king's